I want to talk about two different Packers players who were brought in this past year who have really started to make a pretty big impact, especially when you look at exactly how much they're being paid right now. And the first player I want to talk about is Rudy Ford, who was signed in August by the Packers, the end of August, for only about $1 million. He was released by the Jaguars after just signing a 2-year, $4 million deal the year before. They decide to let him go. And when he came into Green Bay, the biggest reasoning seemed to be because of his special teams ability, for him sort of being known around the league as a really good gunner on the punt return or the punt coverage team. And so that sort of seemed like the reason the Packers brought him in. But as of late, he has started to play a lot more of safety. And in that time, he has started to perform really well. And if you look at his overall grade on PFF, which is the site I'm on right now, when you compare him to every other safety in the NFL, he is graded as the 5th best safety out of, I believe, like 86 or 88 safeties. Much higher than the other Packers safeties who are around like 70 to 80. And so he's played really well. And I think his biggest game, of course, was when he came in, had the 2 interceptions against the Cowboys in that big game. And if we look here at his time, his snaps have definitely gone up the past few weeks. Had an elite grade 88 versus Dallas. Not as great versus Tennessee, mainly due to tackling issues. And then a really good game against the Eagles. And then a somewhat okay game versus the Chicago Bears. But overall in the season, a 79.6 grade. He has only allowed, in his 298 snaps, he's only allowed 9 receptions for 75 yards. And I think this is another example of Brian Gutekunst, who has been very good at finding cheap players who at some point in the season come in and start to make somewhat of an impact. Because to only have to pay Rudy Ford about $1 million on a $1 million deal for a year, for him to come in and start playing a lot of snaps and play overall pretty solid, it's a great find by Brian Gutekunst, considering the Jaguars completely released him, and now Ford is, starting for us a good amount of the time at safety here. And I think that when you look at Brian Gutekunst, his history, this is something that continues to happen. Last year, the big signings, of course, Rasul Douglas off of the practice squad, the Cardinals practice squad, and then Devondre Campbell before the year, only $2 million, and he comes in and plays as probably arguably one of the best inside linebackers in the NFL. Of course, with Rasul and Devondre, we then had to pay them a lot of money to keep them around. But Brian Gutekunst, the past couple of years, has found lots of value in players who, looks like there could not be, much value there at the time of signing. And of course, every player doesn't work out, but when you're signing a guy for $1 million, some of them won't work out. But to find guys like this, that's why one of the reasons I really think that Brian Gutekunst is a very solid GM. Now, the second guy who has really come in and started to play well recently as well is Keyshawn Nixon, cornerback who was on the Raiders previously. The Packers signed him in March, around $1 million as well, sort of like the minimum for NFL players. And the area where Keyshawn Nixon has really started to dominate is in the return game. Right now, when you look at PFF, he is the highest graded returner in the entire NFL. So here is a list on PFF site of the highest grades for overall returner. Keyshawn Nixon, Green Bay, 85.1 return grade. When you look at kickoff returns, he is number 1. So number 1 for kickoffs, and then punts, he's a lot lower with a 63.9 grade, but still averaging in his 4 punt returns. He has 14 yards per attempt. In his 25 kick returns, so he spent a lot more time back there. Returning kicks, 24.7. And I saw an interesting stat on Packers Wire that he is one of only 2 returners in the NFL to average over 24 yards per kickoff return and 10 yards per punt return. And he has 4 straight games of at least 100 kickoff return yards in 4 straight games. And he now is the first Packers player to do that since Steve Odom in 1975. So that sort of shows you just how special Keyshawn Nixon has been in the return game. And I think looking at just how good he's been, the fact he's only signed for $1 million, just him in his return game has been valuable enough. And then you also now look at him on defense, because he started to play somewhat good amount of snaps when it comes to slot corner. 238 snaps overall for the year. He's had some up and down games because he's had some pretty solid games the past 2 weeks. 66 snaps against Philly, 73.4 grade, very solid. Only allowed 2 receptions, -1 yards. And then last week against Chicago, Let's see here. 37 snaps, an 83.5 grade, very solid. 89.2 coverage grade only allowed. Let's see, 1 reception for 14 yards. So he has had some poor games as well against Detroit. 35, not a good graded whatsoever. He's had some bad games as well, according to PFF. But overall, when you look at the fact that Brian Gutekunst signed Keyshawn Nixon for about $1 million, and he's now become arguably one of the best returners in the league, it sort of shows the value, as we already saw with Rudy Ford, that Brian Gutekunst has been able to consistently find in players who you may not expect, too much from them. And so going forward next season, the question is, of course, with Rudy Ford starting to play well, with Keyshawn Nixon also starting to play well, will the Packers decide to sign them, bring them back? If they do, they'll clearly cost more than they have this past season. And I think when you look at the Packers and their safety room, there is a little bit of uncertainty for next year. We already did give, in the past year or so, Darnell Savage his 5th-year option, so he will be back most likely. And then we also have Adrian Amos, who hasn't played as well this year as years past, but he is going to be a free agent, so the Packers will have to decide if they want to sign him. But then Rudy Ford has played well, so they could bring him on in a a little more expensive than a $1 million deal. But I still would expect that you could get him for a pretty reasonable number. And then Keyshawn Nixon, I feel like he should become our long-term returner, because we've struggled for so long in the returning game. Amari Rodgers, had the opportunity for the past year or so and really didn't live up to the expectations that people had. Of course, the Packers ended up releasing him. But Keyshawn Nixon, the way he's played, I think you have to retain him for whatever, however much he will cost. And it's nice that you have a returner who also can contribute on defense if you really need him to, and he could, continue hopefully to get better there as well. But those are two guys I wanted to talk about who have played really well this year. Still, I'd say a little bit under the radar among, the NFL, but among us Packers fans, we sort of recognized how well they've played recently. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys. If you want to see my Packers newsletter, I'm going to try to send out a few of those each week now. So if you want to see those, get those delivered right to your inbox, you can sign up by clicking the link down below. Lots of you guys have already done it, so I appreciate that. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.